We're live.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the study session of the University City Council to order on May 11th at 5:30 p.m. Before you, you have the regular agenda for this evening's meeting. At this time, do you have any changes for the regular meeting? Hearing none, we will move forward to the Stormwater Commission. As I turn it over to Interim City Manager Brooke Sharp, I'd like to take just a moment, and I know on behalf of the Stormwater Commission itself, express our condolences to the family of Todd Thompson, who is the chair of the Stormwater Commission. We extend our deepest sympathies to Todd's family, and we thank them for sharing him with us and having his years of service for our community. Ms. Sharp.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor Crow, members of the City Council. Tonight, we have representatives from HR Green, Inc., who also serve on our Stormwater Commission. They're here to present the Stormwater Master Plan, which has been in the works for a few years now and has been finalized. So they will present that to you, and then we'll talk next steps.
And as you guys probably already know, when you come forward, if you'll put the green button, then we'll let you know if we can all hear. And thank you guys for coming. Gary, it's good to see you again.
Yes. Hello. Glad to join you tonight to summarize and explain and answer some questions about the Stormwater Master Plan that HR Green and Wrights and Gens have been preparing. I'm Gary Ehrenberg, one of the principal authors. The other principal author is Eric Karsh of Wrights and Gens. The Stormwater Master Plan is a living document. It's not meant to be cast in stone in the paper that we've distributed to you. But it describes what are your problems, how do you mitigate those problems, who mitigates those, how do you pay for the mitigation, and how do you implement and update the plan? It's a live plan. It shouldn't be cast in stone and put on a shelf. I've already introduced Eric and myself. Two other principals that have been involved in the project are Josiah Holst and Sam Keevan. All four of us are licensed professional engineers and certified floodplain managers, if you're wondering what CFM stands for. The project began a few years ago with data gathering, historical data. What did MSD have? What did you have? What did the Stormwater Task Force have? Questionnaires, and we got 1,500 responses. That's probably nearly everybody who had a stormwater problem. Visits and conversations with residents, commissions, and citizen groups. That data was evaluated, and we developed that into geographic information, GIS systems, and we identified hotspots. The map on the presentation here is just one of 12 hotspots. We wanted to see if the problems, the responses from questionnaires and other information had geographic concentrations, hotspots, that would lead us to common problems, identify problems. After the analysis, we identified, and it's pretty typical for municipalities throughout the world, actually, but overland flooding, in your case from River des Peres, overland flooding from streets onto your property, residential, public property, overland flooding from one yard to the next, which is really very common, basement flooding, and erosion of the banks of your creeks, River to Pear, and the tributaries. Some of the problems are public and some of them are private. The report goes on to discuss the mitigation. How do we fix it? What are the fixes? You can reduce the stormwater, decrease the impervious area, add detention basins, rain gardens, dry wells, amended soil, and a close cousin to what we've talked about, decreasing the pervious area or adding pervious area. Forest, turf, that kind of thing. You can divert the stormwater away from your structures, diverting the overland flow to the storm sewers. That's the way most urban areas do it. You can discharge the stormwater into channels. In rural areas, they discharge it to the roadside ditches. In urban areas, dense urban areas, like the inner ring suburbs and the city of St. Louis, goes into storm sewers. In our area, most of the sewers are combined sewers. That is, they have sanitary wastewater as well as stormwater in the same sewer. Only the extreme southwest corner of the city is a separate system. You can move people away from flooding. Your buyouts on Wilson Avenue, that's moving people away. And you can make the structures that are in floodwater more resilient. We'll talk about those in more detail. By the way, all of this mitigation costs money. Some of it is private and some of it should be public. We'll talk about that a little bit later. By the way, the page numbers in the lower right-hand corner of these slides are page numbers in the report. So if you want to go back and correlate this presentation to the written document, this is a way to do it. Let's talk about some of the mitigation now of the problems. We picked out some examples so we could get some costs. These aren't necessarily the worst problems, but they're examples of all of the problems in the city. One case is on Westmoreland, just south of Forest Park Expressway and a block west of Big Bend. A house there has a lot of water running off of Forest Park Expressway and through yards. So it's not just from the expressway, but it's also from neighboring yards. And he has ponding in his backyard. One way to fix that is to put a sewer inlet in it and run the sewer out to the street where this MSD has it. Another way is to store the water on site and pump it out later. And that's the example here. You dig a hole, you fill it up with very coarse stone. Coarse stone has a lot of voids between the stone, and that's the storage area. And over the top of the stone, you can put some topsoil and ordinary turf, and the yard looks useful like it did before the storage was added. This is called a dry well. If one did it, we have the cost here for two sites. If two sites did it, and we think there might be more sites in there, but two sites for this purpose here. The cost would be $123,000 for the two sites. So $70,000 for it. Not cheap. The benefit cost ratio, we're going to talk about that because this is a prioritization plan. Which project should be adopted? I'm not sure that you want to adopt this as public, but if you adopted this project as public, the benefit points are 1.3. We're going to talk about the benefits later on, but benefit points, not cost, but points, so that the expensive houses don't have more benefit than the less expensive houses. So if a house has flooding, it gets X points. And it doesn't make any difference how expensive the house is. So it equalizes the benefits throughout the community. It's the same method that MSD uses. And then the cost. So benefit points versus cost, and that's what that 1.3 means. Another common problem is on the next slide. On Milan Avenue, there's drainage through yards. Again, a solution here is an inlet. There's already a sewer close by. The cost for adding this inlet, some regrading in the yard, improving the inlet is $134,000. And the benefit cost for this one property is 3.1. So if you were comparing those two, you would choose this project before you would choose the other one. Or if you wanted to use the benefit points to set a priority. Let's talk about diverting water. 7,000 block and 7,100 block of Amherst. That's Amherst, which is 3 blocks south of Vernon and between Midland and Pennsylvania. Water flows down the gutter, jumps the curb in a severe storm, not every storm, and flows down into the basement garages, causing damage. Not every house has that problem on that double block. You could put in additional inlets. With detailed study, you may have to enlarge the pipe to get water in the gutter into the pipe before it fills up the gutter at the curb and overflowing into basements. If you did that, it's $1.3 million to do that. And the benefit cost for that is 1.4. There's a couple other ways to address that problem. One of those, Councilman Smotherson, the lower left-hand corner, I want to call that to your attention because I was at a meeting that you talked about the damage to your basement. Thank you. Lower left-hand corner of this. You can close off the your floor drains and your garage, and you can suspend your plumbing from the joist to the first floor and pump it out to the sewer. That separates the sewer, your sewer, from the sewer that may be overcharging. You have a basement backup. These houses, these 7 houses that have the basement garages may benefit from that. So if the sewer surcharges, it doesn't come into your basement. This also, you could add barriers at your garage door, your basement garage, and close off the overflowing curb, the water that overflows the curb. There are automatic systems for that. They're very expensive. The one shown in the lower right-hand corner of this diagram is a manually placed system. It's an awkward system. I present this not necessarily as the best way to handle the properties on Amherst, but as alternate methods. It's much less expensive, these two methods, and the benefit cost is 3.4 instead of the 1.3 or something on the previous one. So if you were comparing those two, this would be the option you would choose if you're saying, let's make our choice of projects based on benefit points. Eric is going to talk about some of our other projects now.
Yeah, so we're going to stay with a few example projects and then we'll step back and look at some big picture conversations. So what we're looking at here is Groby Road, where it crosses over the River to Pear. Former councilperson Cusick had a home in this area that was flooded. So that's kind of putting in perspective for folks that know where Tim used to live. This is a project here that flooded again in 2022. The bridge itself has a narrow opening, and our task force identified that very early on in the project. So one of the strategies that the task force asked that we look at was replacing the bridge. The bridge was built in 2006, so it's a fairly new bridge. It's very functional. So replacing it would be sort of throwing out what seems to be in some ways a perfectly good bridge. The constriction that's happening at that bridge is really due to the channel that's upstream and downstream of the bridge. So while the bridge itself is somewhat of a constriction, removing just the constriction that happens at the bridge doesn't solve the flooding problem in that neighborhood. And in addition, you have, if you're going to raise the bridge, let's say, and remove the constriction, then it becomes very difficult for people to access Groby Road. So it's not a very feasible solution to replace that bridge. And instead, buyouts become a real option here. So what you're looking at this particular presentation of a solution shows a pretty expensive buyout here, but with a cost to benefit points ratio that's approaching 1. So it's a pretty decent alternative for you. And I'm going to step back here on the next slide and look at the bigger picture, because obviously everybody in New City is concerned about flooding of residents as a whole. So this picture here tells you kind of one small area of flooding, but we have a larger issue that's citywide. And what we've heard from MSD in this council chamber and other meetings is that we can't engineer our way out of flooding. And they have said as that buyouts of homes are going to remain a very cost-effective and necessary tool to mitigate the flooding. And the master plan team agrees. What we did is we looked back to past reports. The Corps of Engineers did a study that they published in 2013 that said, in U City, we think you ought to buy out all of the homes that are in the 5-year floodplain. Okay, so that ended up being about 100 homes. But what is a 5-year floodplain? Well, people have heard of the 100-year flood. That's something that had become a sort of a common piece of vernacular. What that really means is that there's a 1% chance that the flood is going to reach that elevation in any given year. And so a 5-year flood says there's a 20% chance in any given year that you're going to get that flood. So a 5-year flood is a very frequent thing relative to a 100-year flood. So when the Corps of Engineers said, buy out all the homes that are in the 5-year floodplain, what they're trying to say really is, let's buy out all the homes that are most frequently flooded. Understanding that there are others that are outside of that boundary that are still going to flood, but let's get the ones that are flooding most often. So that seemed to be a pretty good project at the time. The Corps of Engineers gave it a 2.1 cost to benefit ratio. So that's a very good project to do. Um, since the Corps of Engineers has sort of flipped the script on that and they no longer recommend that, but that's a whole other story. But it remains true that looking at homes that frequently flood are a really good idea. And so this project that you're looking at here says what that should be. And, the costs are huge, right? So $59 million, but with a cost to benefit points ratio of 1.4. So still a good ratio there, but it's a very expensive project. So we'll talk later on in the presentation about how to manage those kind of costs. But what this project is really doing is saying there's about 100 homes that you're going to need to buy out to make that happen. We can't tell you exactly which homes they are. In fact, we think we need to do a little bit more data collection in terms of survey, which is a very low cost thing to do to help better prioritize those homes. And then when you compare that to data that our own Stormwater Commission has pulled together to map and survey the flood extents of the 2022 flood and others, you can start to really dial in and specifically pick the homes that are in the worst position and buy those homes out first. Okay. I'll go on to a different example here. This is over, sort of back over to Groby Road. This is Mona Drive, just downstream of Groby Road and just upstream of Firehouse number 2. There's been an erosion project going on here for years and years. The city and MSD are aware of this. MSD's done a bunch of dumping rock. The rock then washes away and it's sort of it hasn't really solved the problem. So the problem here is that Mona, particularly the north end of Mona, is a dead end. So it's the only way that people can access their homes for a certain amount of homes there at the end of Mona. So if that erosion continues, it washes out Mona Drive and now people can't get to their home. So it's an important project to consider because we've seen past solutions fail there. What we know based on the engineering we've done is that you need a more of a vertical treatment. And when I say vertical treatment, that's essentially a wall and those walls become quite expensive. So what you have here is a project that's going to benefit 17 homes and at a cost of over $4 million. Benefit points to cost ratio at 0.5. So it's trending down towards not a great ratio. In fact, what we think here is that buyouts start to become a more attractive solution in this particular site. So that's just a way you can look at things. And Gary's presented that as well. You have a problem and there's a couple different ways to solve it. And in this case, we do think a buyout is probably your better option. Another example, this is over on north and south at Amherst. It's a bank erosion problem. A couple of the properties are suffering from fence issues and things that are, while important, not life critical. There is one home that's on the corner of this site. It's 7591 Amherst that the bank erosion is starting to steer in and is trying to take the house. Since we did this analysis, which showed you have a $1.3 million cost, it's going to benefit two properties at a ratio of 0.8. But since we've done this, in your own council chambers, the subject's been raised that MSD's on the hunt to do a different kind of project here that has to do with the sanitary sewer system. And they've actually made I suppose, an offer towards buying out one of these properties. So that may change the math on this because that property is the one that's most at risk. And if MSD buys that and tears it down, well, then the math on this particular option, this particular project changes. But it does give you a sense that these bank erosion projects are very expensive to fix. Okay. I'm going to turn it back here to Gary for one more example project, and then we'll get back into some big picture stuff.
On Mendel at near Canton, near the United Hebrew Cemetery, downhill from that, there are 3 intersections that flood frequently. That intersection flooding is independent of what goes on the cemetery property. Because you can see I should say the lower 12.2 acres here in the drawing is greatly influenced by the cemetery. But the other 23.6 and 24.8 are independent of the cemetery. They're different watersheds. We have 3 intersections that flood there. There are ways to minimize that flooding. I'm not sure that we can eliminate the flooding there, but make it very less frequent. One of the ways is to take the sewers that are on the hill west of Mendel, east of Mendel, and take that water straight through to a tributary to River Des Peres. Make it independent of the intersection. So the flood water at the intersection is only the water that falls on the intersection instead of the other 50 some acres there. So right now we have 50 acres coming to those 3 intersections, and the water just hits the bottom of the hill and just comes up out of the inlets. So let's get most of that water independent of the inlets, pass it on through. If we did that, we're probably talking about $170,000 project, and the benefit cost ratio, because we're going to benefit 40 properties here, would be 6.5.
Great. So what we're showing here is just a very overly simplified summary here to show you what kinds of costs we're talking about from the various different types of stormwater problems, overland flooding being the big one, of course, coming out at almost, $52 million is the high end of that. Street flooding, like Gary was just talking about at Wayne and Mendel, is second on the list, coming out at almost $4 million. Flooding for yards, we're getting to smaller types of projects. So of course the total costs are less. And then these bank erosion projects are shockingly high as well. So this kind of gives you a breakdown. The goal here of this whole project really is to help get the city some perspective on the types of problems, the total costs that are involved. And so we can start to prioritize as a city, how do we want to go about this? How fast do we want to get this done? And which ones should we do first? So that gives you some perspective on that. The way we've been ranking these projects is the same way that MSD ranks it. And that's on purpose. There's been some consternation about MSD, of course, throughout the region and in our city as well over the years. But we do think one of the many things they do well actually is this benefit calculation, benefit point calculation. And as Gary said, it's a very equitable a strategy because it takes away home value and really just says, John's home, my home, they're the same. They're both structurally flooding, and so they're treated equally. And that's a really good thing, particularly in a community where the home values there's a big spread on them, right? So we want to take that out of the equation and really just help the most people we can for the dollars that we can. So the good thing about using MSD's system, well, there's a few, but MSD already maintains a certain list of projects, just like we're coming up with on our own here for U City. MSD has a region-wide list. They rank those points using this same system, and then they take their own dollars and they start to prioritize and do which one's the highest priority and just go on down the list. So if we put our projects in that same ranking system, then they feed right into MSD's list. And if we're lucky, MSD will do some of those projects for us. So that's a good thing. they have a very long backlog of projects. And so the chances they'll get to a project in U City, well, it's going to take some time, just like it will for any other community. But we'd rather have the opportunity for MSD to put our projects into their system than not have that opportunity. So using this system, it's equitable and it fits in with MSD. So that's a good thing. Mitigation. So this is something that Gary alluded to from the top, and it has to do with what is a public versus what is a private project. And we know that as we showed in that summary of the projects, there's a huge cost to doing all of this, and it's going to exceed the budget of the city for sure. But any one property owner who has these problems, it may exceed their budget as well, because these can be very expensive to do. So the need is certainly there. What we want to do though is to also come up with policy. You know, the city is going to want to come up with policy here that says, you know, you can apply it equally. If anybody comes in, they say, I got this stormwater complaint. I'd like the city to take a look at it. The city can take a look at it. If it's a public problem, it goes in the hopper with the rest of them and it gets prioritized, and the city will eventually, you know, attempt to solve that problem as they have budget, well, you know, as that budget will allow. But likewise, if the policy shows this is a private problem, this was a privately built home or a privately built business, it was built in a way that left it vulnerable to flooding, the flooding problems or the stormwater problems, whatever they are local to that property. And so should it really be a public solution? So these are hard conversations, but we've seen elsewhere in neighboring communities these same questions tackled, and it just gives your own public works department a guiding document to go to, and they can say, yep, you're a public problem, or no, sorry, you're a private problem. That doesn't mean we're going to abandon that property owner, but it just may mean that it won't get necessarily direct city funding to solve it. So, you know, this, when you look at the sum total of all the project that the city has, I think, you know, having this policy is going to be a good thing to go over.
Let me add something
Yeah, please.
here. We discussed this at the Stormwater Commission. We discussed this extensively with the Stormwater Commission, and the Stormwater Commission could not reach a conclusion about which of these items or other items should make the city policy, or they chose not to make a recommendation. I guess we could say they kicked the can to you guys. Anyway, these are factors that you may want to consider in making a policy of what the city pays for and what you tell the homeowner when he comes in and says, I need some help. Are you going to say, sorry, we can't help you, or we'll put you on the list? So this is really important. We don't want to skip over that, but we're not telling you what the policy should be. You may come back to the commission, Stormwater Commission, or you may make your own subcommittee to consider this further, or you may already have some policies that we aren't privy to that you want to adopt.
Thank you. Yeah, good clarification. It's a fraught topic. It really is, but it's an important one to tackle, and we'd be happy to continue to help you on this this subject. All right. We have some other I'll call them lower cost ways to help solve some of these issues. Code, city code and policy. You know, we just mentioned the policy about public versus private, but there's other policies and codes that we can begin to tackle. The task force years ago recommended dealing with one issue, which are properties and developments that are less than 1 acre in size. The sewer district does have a permit that you have to pull whenever you get a project that's bigger than 1 acre. And you need to, in those cases, deal with stormwater for that project. They, however, broadly exempt projects that are smaller than 1 acre. And the city's policy or city's code does not currently cover that either. So essentially small development is not held to the same standards as larger development. And that makes sense. But when you also think about the fact that U City is largely fully developed. And so the types of projects that you can happen, they're not often Costco or like that size. They're often smaller projects. So, I mean, when you look at places like Kirkwood, where they've had some of these smaller homes, you tear down and you put the McMansion on and that kind of thing. We're not seeing that U City yet, but it's out there maybe. So, dealing with these small lot projects is a good thing to do. U Heights Flood Task Force picked up on that notion as well, and they said, "Yeah, let's do that. Let's put that in place." They made some efforts at drafting some language, took that to the Stormwater Commission. We vetted that through, and we came what we think is a pretty good code revision, and that's actually gone on through now to the thank you, Planning and Zoning Commission. So it's kind of been vetted and thought through. It's not only dealing with these small developments, but it's also doing things like if you're going to put in a new driveway or an expanded driveway or what have you, prohibiting any one person from putting that drainage onto their neighbor. Nuisance, so-called nuisance stormwater. So these are very basic things that really don't have a direct cost to the city. They have an impact on development and the spirit of development. So there could be real costs involved here, but we do think these are you're kind of set up well to implement some code revisions that the task force, the commission, the stormwater master plan team, and a lot of people are in favor of. So that's just one thing we'd like to discuss, I suppose, in the master plan on how to get some momentum going at a lower cost. Another big topic is public education. The task force and the commission have long thought that there's a lot of resources we've gathered as a community over the years that we should really make available and help educate the public, because a lot of folks don't know when they buy a house, there's this creek next to it and they may not even know the house floods, or if so, what to do or how to prevent it or how to minimize the damage. And these are just all different pieces of education that we could be sharing with the community. So another low cost thing and that we could do. We've written articles and roars. So we've done some things to help trying to forward that ball, but there could be maybe a more concerted effort for public education. Things like having a library of information, whether it's in the public library or on a website, things like that. Right. How to pay for it? Not an easy topic, but what we have tried to do is put together a list of possible resources. There's some really good news here. We know as a community, MSD successfully passed their Proposition S, which essentially started to have ratepayers pay ahead money that can be used for stormwater mitigation. So the MSD is doing their own projects now for stormwater that they had put on pause for a number of years. And the city itself is getting a direct cut of some of that money to choose their own projects and spend that money as they will. So that's some really good news. The numbers are there, $325,000 a year plus another $175,000 from OMCI, which we can talk about that taxing district. That's a separate funding stream, but those are two real steady sources that the city can take advantage of. We know that there's a parks and stormwater tax, most of which is going to parks at the moment, but when that debt's paid, there'll be a little bit more money that's freed up that could be used for some stormwater projects. So there's some funding that's already there in place. It is not going to pay for $52 million worth of buyouts. So where does the rest of that money come from? And this is where it gets difficult. There are federal and state grants. They're very competitive. They're hard to get. And you need some staff to be able to manage all that. And we know that as a city, our Department of Public Works is down some staff at the moment. I think last I saw, there were 2 advertisements for 2 positions to help kind of bolster up the public works, and certainly everything we've talked about today and is going to need some additional staff time to help figure out and push forward. So as a just for the grants, let's say, and to manage things like the FEMA community rating system, which we can talk about later if you have questions. You might need a half of a full-time equivalent staff person just to do that. So these are real needs that the city has. A big thing here that I don't want to gloss over is the potential for a different type of city bond that, if you really want to get serious about doing buyouts, you could look to do something major like that that could really get a funding stream set up to be able to do buyouts. Okay, I'm going to let Gary wrap it up.
We talked earlier that the Stormwater Master Plan should be a living document. You will be presented with problems often and have to decide whether they get put ahead of an older list or how you decide to maintain a capital improvement list if you decide to do that. So remember, this is a living document. The benefit point system is in the report, and it doesn't take a special engineer like Eric and me to fill that out. You guys can fill it out. Your staff can fill it out. The costs, we have some cost tables, and you guys can identify the costs. We're accustomed to doing it, but it is not rocket science. So you can, as projects come in, not wait 5 years or 10 years to update the plan. You can run with it and make it a living document. You can continually identify and prioritize projects. You can support grant applications. You can lobby Congress and senators for earmarks. Earmarks are back into the system. It may be a little bit smaller earmarks for the next few years, but I don't think that will be forever. There's other funding, support that other funding. There's an early warning system that'll give people in the floodplain about 20 minutes notice when it's fully implemented through the red code system. That may be time for them to move their cars to the top of the hill. Surveying the first floor elevations of the houses that are near River Des Peres would be a good start to have that in your quiver of arrows when you apply for grants. You know which houses should be bought out. There are some houses in the floodplain that are set up on a high pad next to houses that are on a low pad. It's the low pad houses that you want identified. They're the candidates for buyouts, not the house that was built at a different time that's on a higher pad. That's what I mean by get that data now. So when the grant application notices come out and you have 4 or 5 weeks, you don't have to run around at the last minute. Eric talked about the community rating system. The community rating system is a way to get discounts for the people who buy flood insurance. People who live in the floodplain and have a federally subsidized loan must buy flood insurance. Other people may buy flood insurance. The federally funded flood insurance is heavily subsidized by Congress. I think they're about $3 billion in the hole right now because the FEMA funds have been paying for flood mitigation over the years in many places. And I bet the FEMA flood insurance program will never pay back that $3 billion. And Congress doesn't have enough nerve to make the FEMA flood insurance actuarially accurate. So that's why there's a big discount. So people who are in the floodplain are getting assistance from all of us because their flood insurance is heavily subsidized. But you need to support continued FEMA flood insurance, but people can get a discount if you go through some bureaucratic hoops to prove that you're doing more than the minimum. You're keeping track of which houses have damage. Because when a house is damaged, 50% damaged, it cannot be reused. It has to be removed from the floodplain. You can move the house to higher ground. You can put the house up on stilts. And when you travel around to small communities, especially Fenton, places like that, you'll see houses that are stuck up in the air. Well, they were damaged and they can only be rebuilt if they're put up in the air above the 100-year flood elevation. Or if houses are continually damaged over many floods and they accumulate damage, they can't be put back in. If you keep track of that, you get some bonus points, to use the colloquial brownie points. There are other brownie points you can accumulate. If you get enough brownie points, your flood insurance, people who buy flood insurance get discounts. So it's a program you can participate in. To start out with, it'll take somebody about half time a year to get into the program. And then it'll probably take quarter time, 20% time to maintain it. So you don't have the staff to enter that right now. Well, the next slide is questions and answer, and for some reason I can't get the slides to advance here. But the next slide is, got it. Question and answers now.
Thank you very much. To my colleagues, questions or comments for the presenters this evening? Councilmember Teeman.
Honorable Mayor, my fellow colleagues, I really don't have any questions, but I just simply want to say, just so we're clear, what we've had here in the half an hour, 45 minutes of presentation is a summary of almost a decade of work. And I want to say to the members of the Stormwater Commission, present and past, that whatever faults this honorable body may have, our gratitude or lack of gratitude is not one of them. I profoundly thank you for the work you've done for this city and for your civic service. So on behalf, I think I can say on behalf of all my colleagues, thank you.
Are there questions or comments from other members of council? I think you have in front of you the draft of the stormwater plan itself. And I hope that you'll each take the time to go through it. There's a lot of good meat in there for conversation. Gary, I see you have a finger up.
Page 43 and 44 are the recommendations in detail. We summarize the recommendations here, but there's 2 pages, kind of dense. Go through that. That's really important stuff there where we detail some projects that if you wanted to put on a capital improvement list, you could do that. And some of the other things that we've talked about.
Councilmember Smotherson.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Crow. Again, Gary, thank you for the presentation of both of you and the work that the Stormwater Task Force has done. So I really appreciate that. Quick question that I wanted to ask. One of them is with the area around Mendale and Wayne. You mentioned three intersections, and I know that one of the intersections is Mendale and Wayne. The other is probably Canton and Mendale. Is that correct?
Yes, and then the intersection just north of that, and I can't.
Yeah, I can't think
I'm
of that
having
street.
Senior Milan.
Milan, okay.
I'm having a senior moment. I can't
Right,
remember.
no, I got it. That's Milan and Mendale, correct? Okay, and so I appreciate this report and actually appreciate the numbers that you're showing because the way that this report is stating is that this is something that can be addressed. Because that's been a long-standing problem at Mendale and Wayne and those streets. And that's in the way that this report comes out. It looks like that is something that we could really address. And one of the priorities that we could take care of so that we can stop the frequency of this happening. And just to simply say to you, so you're really stating that we could actually create inlets that actually are separate so that they don't all rush down to Mendale, the basin. And we can actually separate those inlets that are upstream on Wayne and then separate those and send those directly. So I really appreciate hearing that news and think that that's something that this council and this city could actually look into doing. So really do thank you for that. The last thing one of the things I also wanted to say is that with Mona Drive, even if we were to buy out the houses on Mona Drive, that River de Pear is still going to erode. So that's going to continue. And so should we just really focus on the erosion or would it be a combination of both?
Let's back up on both of the projects you just brought up. The conceptual design we presented here are not suitable for making your final decision.
Mhm.
It gives you a prioritization, a ranking of what you should be looking at in kind of a gross way. But each one of these projects needs to be given to a consulting engineer, or if you had a big enough staff, your own staff, to do a detailed alternative analysis. As we talked about earlier, there's more than one way to fix these. We've identified conservative ways of looking at it. Regarding Mona, some of you have heard people say, well, we ought to use natural channel design for River de Pear. Natural channel design is a meandering stream. Meandering streams take up a wide corridor. If you remove the houses, you can allow that branch to meander a little bit. Now, you don't want it to meander so much that it meanders to the next rank of houses.
Right.
But you could let it meander a little bit. You can lay the banks back instead of being nearly vertical now on the Mona Drive side. If you bought the houses, you can lay the banks back and make it more stable so it won't erode as much. It's the vertical or nearly vertical banks that erode. So the alternative analysis there should look at how do we make that stream stable? Eric talked about the worst case, you put a wall there. There may be, if someone studied it more than an hour, 2 hours, because we're looking at a lot of projects here, may come up with something else. You also have to consider if you bought those houses, you've now taken 15, 16 houses off the tax-paying rolls. So maybe a wall is the most economical and keep those houses on the tax rolls. Or you may say the cost of the wall is so high we can buy all of those houses, then we don't have to pay for a very expensive wall. That's why I mean why you need to get an engineer to evaluate the alternatives. We've helped you identify it as a very important project. Now you need some additional study to determine the best way to tackle that.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Thank you. And the last thing is, in your report, is Hafner part of your report? And what's happening at Hafner with those 3 channels that come into that one section? And that's why we have this
Yeah, that
explosion that happens.
right. Hafner Court is the first rank of houses along that 95. When we say 95 houses should be removed, 95 properties, we're talking about the first rank or the first 2 ranks of houses next to River de Pere. And that group of apartments is in the first rank. So yes, it's part of that 95. It's part of the $52 million. If you were to do it all now, you're now doing it a little bit piecemeal as money becomes available.
Anyone else? Councilmember Brenner.
How, do you have a sense of how other municipalities in the area have dealt with, like whose responsibility is what, because we've got MSD, we have county roads, we have, city roads, we have a few state, and then private property, et cetera, et cetera. Like how are other cities managing all those different entities and making decisions on what is their responsibility?
Let me use street drainage as an example. The inlets on a street, if you were putting a new street in, would be the city responsibility. You're putting the street in, you're putting the inlets in. You're going to tie the inlets to an MSD sewer. And MSD will agree if you put the inlets in, they'll maintain the inlets from then on. But the sewer is already in the ground and it's theirs. If, however, you were putting a new street in a site that was not previously developed, the developer would have to put the storm sewer in and the inlets in. So it would be the developer. So the inlets are really a city responsibility because the street is a city responsibility, generally speaking. At Midland and Amherst a few years ago, we became aware that St. Louis County came out and looked at the inlets on Midland because the water on Midland, in the gutter on Midland, the east side of Midland was running into Amherst and running down into the driveways of the basement garages along Amherst, which is a private street, which throws another wrinkle into it. So St. Louis County took responsibility for that inlet because Midland at that point is a St. Louis County street. About 10 years ago, I did a project, completed a project, putting a 4-way area inlet in a backyard in Maryland Heights. This was right after Maryland Heights got the casino, and Maryland Heights had a lot of money. They said, we're going to take this money and we're going to spend it to help our residents. So Maryland Heights took that inlet in that backyard as a public responsibility. But other communities won't do that. So it's going to come down to what you want to do, that public, private, and how much money you have. Yeah, Eric has some ideas too.
Just another example there, Ms. Brenner, at creek erosion, because we've heard a lot about, doesn't MSD own the creeks? And they've come in here and told us, no, we don't own the creeks in large part. So, Gary's talking about how we've handled streets, city or county, structures, city or MSD. But I would just throw in there, these creek erosion issues are, unfortunately, MSD will come in here and tell you that if it's on private property, the river that is, and in many cases that's true, the river is actually on private property, then that is not an MSD responsibility. MSD is going to take responsibility for what they call improved channels. And that's a very clear policy. They're not being shady on that. It's just stated in their own charter, their own policies. So what's an improved channel? Well, if you get down between Pennsylvania and Mi Ranchito, it's a concrete lined channel back there. I don't know how many people have seen it. The folks that are in U Heights certainly have. That is a concrete line channel. That's considered an improved channel, and that's something that MSD would take on. So if there's erosion in that area, MSD is going to take it on. But in large parts of the city where they're more natural, like in Heman Park, these are areas where they're not MSD facilities. Going further upstream where River de Pear crosses under Midland and on around as you're getting onto Wilson, that's another concrete line section. So that's a section that MSD would take ownership of and responsibility for. So I think what we're trying to paint the picture of, the answer to your question depends on which thing it is you're looking at. Is it a street? Is it an inlet? Is it a river channel? Is it erosion? So it just depends. But other municipalities have handled it in that same way, just recognizing what the different ownership and maintenance responsibilities are, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're over time. Just to all of you, thank you very much to all of my colleagues on City Council. I hope that you will make additional outreach to the members of the Stormwater Task Force and to also our presenters tonight, because I think all of us would serve our community well by spending a little bit more time with them and learning the scoring process. I think as we move forward with limited resources, it's important for us to look at the scoring system that is utilized and determine where we can strategically find partnerships and find other dollars. With that, we will adjourn the study session, and unless someone needs to take a break, we will move right into the regular session because it is a relatively light agenda. So the study session is adjourned, and we will start the regular session in about 1 minute.